Record.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. Welcome everyone to the Direct Tax Refresher Course 2021. It's a 5 days course, which is from today and tomorrow. It is not on Sunday, so directly on 12th, 13th, and 14th July. So now let's welcome together to our speaker for the day, CA Sharat Waze, CA Chandrasekhar V. Chitle. He is the chairman. He is the Direct Tax Committee, Chairman of the Direct Tax Committee and CCM of ICAI, CA Samir Ladda. He is the Chairman and Treasurer of Pune ICAI. CA Kashinath Pathare. He is the Vice Chairman and the Secretary for the Pune ICAI. And he is the Chairman of the Taxation Subcommittee of Pune ICAI and RCM MCM. Okay, so now I request CA Samir Ladda, who is the Chairman and the Treasurer of Pune ICAI, for the welcome address to the crowd. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rajeshri. Respected CCM, CV Chitre sir, Directors, Chairman of Directors Committee, Central Council. Today's speaker, CA Sharat Waze sir, my co-chairman, CA Kashinath Pathare, and my colleague in Management Committee, CA Amruta Kulkarni. Today's speaker, Rajeshri, today's MOC, Rajeshri Sahal, and August audience. Welcome in this DTRC organized by Pune branch of ICAI. This is our yearly conference, and I know all the participants are always waiting for the DTRC organized by Pune branch. I especially congratulate Sey Kashinath Pathare, my co-chairman, who has coordinated very well this DTRC course under the guidance of CV Chitre sir. Thank you, CV Chitre sir, for helping us as always for coordinating this and arranging this DTRC. It is our privilege that here we have our DTRC chairman of Central Council, who belongs to Pune, our beloved CCM CV Chitre sir, and so one of the best speaker and one of the senior speaker, Sri Sharat Waje sir. Waje sir, thank you very much on behalf of Pune branch and all the audience for giving time. You are always there to help us for any chapter of income tax. Thanks again. Welcome again on behalf of all the Pune branch. Wish you all happy learning. Thank you. Over to Rajesh.
Thank you, sir. I
Rajeshri,
now
your volume is very low. Please adjust.
okay. Is it better now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I request CA Chandrasekhar V. Chitle, sir, who is the Chairman and Direct Tax Committee, CCM ICAI, to just to address the crowd with his kind words. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajeshri, Honorable Chairman, Vice Chairman, and Managing Committee member, and my good friend Sharat, who is going to discuss about capital gains today. In fact, today is the first day of our direct tax refresher course. And whenever there is a DTRC, my memory goes back to 1988-89, when both myself and Sharat were on the managing committee. And when I was chairman, I think the first DTRC took place in that year as far as Pune branch is concerned.
Yes.
And thereafter, without any break, the Pune branch is organizing this DTRC. And this is one of the most popular events. In fact, in the year 88-89, whatever collection was not there by the branch for the whole year in earlier years, only one program we could collect, let me place on record. And even the attendance with the membership of 900 was more than 250. So with that background, this DTRC is now continuing, and definitely the direct tax, up till now, as far as law is concerned, there were great challenges. Today, the technology is concerned, that is also throwing challenge as far as direct taxes are concerned. So legal challenges, Sharad will unfold, but to some extent, let me unfold the technology challenges which are faced by the stakeholders. As you are aware that the new system went on steam on 7th of June, and today more than 1 month has passed. However, it has not resumed to its normalcy. After the system was not working well, Honorable Finance Minister invited me for the purpose of meeting and our President. Since I had some other commitments, I requested Vice Chairman Direct Tax and President to join the meeting with the Finance Minister. And therefore, they joined and they sought help of the ICAI. And thereafter, the our team was constituted by nominating members from various regions. This team is constantly interacting with CBDT, with Infosys, and with us. So maybe hopefully the problems may be addressed very soon. But even if it is going to be soon, I don't think that will happen. It's my personal estimate, 4 to 5 weeks hence. Therefore, one will have to bear for that time. As far as profession and stakeholders are concerned, there were several inquiries that when it is going to be normal, the last date is approaching. But then our response was, even if the last date is approaching, it is not your fault. Say in case of charitable institution, you are not able to upload re-registration forms. So it is for the income tax department to provide the infrastructure. And you will appreciate that while we are studying Contract Act, even the basics of contract is laid down in various case law, which says that if the person who is expecting you to do something and he is going to provide you infrastructure, and if you are not able to perform because of failure of infrastructure, it is not your fault. So maybe that was the case. But then we have adopted the approach after I assumed the chair of this direct taxation committee, not of confrontation, but of cooperation with the Central Board of Direct Taxes. And we are not complaining every now and then. But that doesn't mean the grievances of stakeholders are not reaching the CBDT. Orally, we are discussing, we are preparing notes, we are submitting those notes at the time of personal meeting. Therefore, even for this portal failure, you won't find any letter from ICAI. And in fact, subsequently, when we had a virtual meeting with Finance Minister, I had been along with Honorable President, she publicly told at that meeting, others were also present, that from nook and corner of the country, we were receiving complaints. Complaints were received by Income Tax Office, CBDT, Finance Minister, and even Prime Minister. However, it was ICAI which did not complain, and to the contrary, they came to our help, and they are associated with us for the purpose of resolution of these difficulties. It is not very happy state that, okay, some difficulties come, some test has not been made. But then today that is the given situation, and it is not within our control, our domain. It is within the control of maybe CBDT, Finance Ministry, and the contractor, that is the Infosys. So what went wrong, maybe the time will unfold us the mystery. But today we are facing the problems. And although there are problems, I'm sure that whatever time is required, extension will be available. So during this time, there are certain practical problems also, like foreign remittances are not possible because you cannot upload 15 CACB. Lower rate of TDS is not possible because you are not getting certificates. So these aspects we have escalated to the CBDT. And as far as 15 CACB is concerned, they have already given you alternate method for the purpose of issuing those forms and making foreign remittances. Even when we discussed some of those complaint that when we go with these forms to the banks, they are not accepting because they say that it should be on the website or things like that. And we have not received any communication from the head office. Once again, we requested the CBDT that please inform the entire banking sector that whether the head office informs or not, this is Government of India directive, and CBDT is the administrator for income tax, so that should be accepted. Now they have done the needful, and I'm told that now banks have started accepting these physical forms 15 CACB. So friends, as far as this committee is concerned, we are working hand in hand with the CBDT. Considering the constraint of time, I will not elaborate much, but you will appreciate that the circulars which are meaningful for the stakeholders, they are also marking a copy of circular to the ICAI. As far as our committee is concerned, from the CA day, that is 1st of July, it has also started issuing a monthly newsletter, Tax Times. And in this particular newsletter, you will find all notifications, circulars, etc. issued during the month, and certain summary of certain High Court and Supreme Court judgments. And particularly, we are laying more emphasis on unreported judgments rather than reported ones. So even if you come across any unreported judgment of High Court or Supreme Court, which is of importance, or maybe if it is reported, but it is of significant importance from our professional perspective, I appeal you to send that particular judgment along with summary to the direct tax committee or to me, we will certainly be happy to publish it. Of course, if you have no time to prepare summary, even if you share the decision, we will get the summary prepared and we will publish it in that newsletter. And this will certainly benefit all the stakeholders. And this particular newsletter will be coming on first day of each month. So with this compilation of newsletters, whatever all circulars they were issued during various months, one will be able to capture. So this would be a collector's item. And I'm sure that the profession will receive this particular initiative of the Direct Tax Committee of ICAI. So as far as this DTC is concerned, I'm very glad that the managing committee member who was then associated with the DTRC, Sharad Waze, is once again back as a changing the hat and as a speaker. And I'm sure that he will be sharing his in-depth knowledge in the subject and we all will be beneficiaries of it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your kind words. So now I request C. Kashinath Patare, sir. He's the Vice Chairman and the Secretary of Pune ICAI. He's also the Chairman of Taxation Subcommittee of Pune ICAI. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, all of you. On behalf of Pune branch, welcome all of you for direct tax refresher course. This course started by CV Chitle sir.
काशीनाथ तो आवाज येत नाहीये काशीनाथ.
It is a bit low.
Get a revaluation done. So we have the remaining assets. Revaluation करवा ले. If you get
नाही काहीतरी बॅकअपला अजून आवाज येतोय थोडासा. बोल काशीनाथ.
Good evening. येतोय का?
Yes, yes.
Good evening, all of you. As Chitre sir said, by this DTRC course started by CV Chitre sir and Waze sir since long ago, in I think 1993, right, sir? Waze sir?
No, 88, 81, 88, 91, we were there. We started in 1988.
Okay, 88. Since also this course, I thanks all managing committee members to I appointed third for giving opportunity for third consecutive years for direct taxation committee. Also, I thank Chitre sir, who also got direct tax national conference in next month. We will update it soon. Thanks all participants for joining. Wish you happy learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So now we are now coming back to the main session. I'd like to introduce our speaker, C. Sharad Atmaram Waze. I have a lot to say about him, but keeping timing in my mind, I'll say a few words about him. Sharad Waze is a fellow member of ICAI. He is in practice from last 37 years, exclusively engaged in the practice of direct taxes. He is the senior partner in Sharad A. Waze and Company, which is in Pune. He's also a postgraduate in Commerce and LLB. He's also graduate member of Institute of Cost Accountants of India. He is the managing committee member of Pune branch of, he was the managing committee member of the Pune branch of ICAI during year 1989 to 1991. And he was the chairman of the Pune branch in 1990 to 1991. He has written many articles on taxation, company law, banking, and many more. He has been faculty to various seminars conducted by ICAI, ICSI, and many colleges. And of course, he loves teaching a lot. He is retired as an associate professor from BM College of Commerce, which is in Pune, after 35 years teaching costing and taxation. He has been visiting faculty to National Assurance Academy, Symbiosis Institute, etc. Beside all these, he has also represented before ITAD or tax appeals. He has been the counsel to more than 25 chartered accountants for their cases before disciplinary committee of ICAI. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Rajeshri, just a minute. You are referring Waze, but he is Waze. Maybe you are influenced by correct newspapers, but his surname is Waze.
Waze, sorry, sir. Waze.
I was to tell that anyhow.
Thank you. An
And
apology.
in these days, it is necessary to clarify.
Yes, yes. I too, people call me Rajashri sometimes. So at that moment, I say them it's Rajeshri. Thank you.
No, Vase has got different connotations, so this was necessary.
No connection, relation whatsoever. Shall I
Over to you,
start?
sir. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
okay,
Thank
thank you. Yeah, at the outset, I thank the branch management for inviting me. As our CCM Shekhar has spoken about it, we started this direct taxes refresher course in 1988. It's almost 33 years now, and it's going every year. As to the first, I congratulate Shekhar Chitai for being the chairman of the Direct Taxes Committee, and I can only add one line that the DTC is in safe hands, suffice to say at this, because he's capable of handling anything, and at least I personally look for different position with the institute, not only the Direct Taxes Committee. All of us understands what I mean to say. Now, I have been given the topic of issues in capital gains. As to the topic, it says only issues in capital gains. That means I am presuming that all of us are aware about the capital gains, how it is calculated, etc. So I'll discuss with the issues. I will not discuss the in generality, what is capital gain, it is the third head of income, and so on and so forth. But briefly, I just summarize it in this way. Capital gains is the third head of income. First is salary, then house property, business profession, fourth head of income, capital gains, and the last one is income from other sources. Each head has got a charging section. So capital gain has got three charging sections, section 45, 46, and 46A, because the charging section defines the scope of that particular head of income. Then we have got certain two sections, section 47 and 47A, which deals with certain transactions not regarded as transfer. Then we have got computational mechanism in section 48. Then we have got section 49 read with section 47. It is with reference to cost to the previous owner. Then there are special provisions like section 50 read with 50A, 50B, 50C, CA read with 55A, and so on. Then various exemption sections from 54 to 54H. Definitions pertaining to capital gains, section 55, and the valuation officer, 55A. So I presume that this is the broad structure of the head of capital gains. I will not be going section by section wise because it is the topic itself is issues in capital gains. So I presume that basic things are known to all of us, including the audience. Now, as to the section 45(1), which states that any profits or gains arising from the transfer of a capital asset effected in the previous year shall be chargeable to income tax in the previous year in which the transfer took place. Then it says the important words are transfer of a capital asset and the previous year in which the transfer takes place. Now, the term transfer is defined in section 247, to which again I'm not going, but with reference to that, certain issues must be understood. One thing is the capital in the year in which the transfer is effected. So if the property is transferred, say today on 9th of July, then it will be subject to capital gains tax for assessment year 22-23 because it is pertaining to financial year 21-22. Now, the real issue might be with reference to certain assets on certain dates or certain dates in a year. The property.
शरद सर एकच मिनिट तुमच्या बॅकला लाईट आहे ती ऑफ करतील का ती तुमच्या चेहऱ्यावर खूप चमकते.
येस येस ओके ओके 1 मिनिट.
मागच्या बाजूची जी लाईट आहे.
येस. Is it okay? Hello?
Yes, sir. It is right.
Is it okay now? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. So coming back to, it is in the year in which it is subject to transfer is effected. Now, it is applicable to property of any kind. So property may be movable property or property may be immovable property. With respect to movable property, the law applicable is Transfer of Sale of Goods Act 1932, and in respect of immovable property, the law applicable is Transfer of Property Act 1882. Now, the basic difference between the two legislation is under the Sale of Goods Act, the ownership gets transferred when the delivery is effected. It may be actual or notional. Whereas in case of Transfer of Property Act, the ownership gets transferred when the conveyance is executed and the possession is given from the income tax point of view. So if the document is executed, say as on 25th of March 21, and it is registered on say 10th of April 21. So the date of document is 25th of March 21 and date of registration is 10th of April 21. Now, what is the date for capital gain calculation? In a sense, as you are aware, you have to register a document within 4 months from the date of purchasing the stamp paper or from the date of execution of the document conveyance. Now, in this case, the document is registered on 10th of April, but the effect is from 25th of March. So such transaction is liable to tax for assessment year 21-22 and not for assessment year 22-23, because the registration gets back to the date on which the document is executed, that is 25th of March. However, if the document is executed on 25th of March, it is registered on 10th of April, but the possession is given subsequent to 10th of April or in the month of April. Now, in that case, the capital gain will be subject to tax for the assessment year 22-23 and not for 21-21, even though the transfer relegates to the date of execution, that is 25th of March. Liability to capital gains tax will arise when the possession is given, and that for that we have got a decision of the Bombay High Court in case of Tawakal Fitness Club. I'll give the citation of that. 1 minute, if anybody is interested. Tawakal Fitness Club 2018 409 ITR 37, where the Bombay High Court has held that possession is given on 16 June 2011 after receipt of full consideration. So it will be chargeable to tax for AY 12-13 and not for AY 11-12, even though the document was registered on 14 February 2011. Now, the special leave petition filed by the department against this Bombay High Court decision is also dismissed by the Honorable Supreme Court. So with reference to that, in the year in which it is chargeable to tax. So normally it is chargeable to tax in the year in which ownership gets transferred, but in exceptional cases, especially with respect to immovable properties, it is transferable in the year in which possession is given, and accordingly, the year of taxation will change, although the registration might be pertaining to earlier previous year. Now, as to the another issue with reference to short-term capital gain and long-term capital gain. The term short-term capital gain is defined in section 242A, short-term capital asset, and short-term capital gain in 242B. Then all of us are aware that in case of short-term capital gain with respect to an asset being financial asset, the period of holding is 1 year. In case of residential property, the period of holding is 2 years. In case of any other property, the period of holding is 3 years. Now, the issue before the courts and the Pune tribunal was the facts of that particular case. The assessee purchased the land in the year 2001. He started construction in the year 2010 and got the completion in 2012. For some reason, the assessee sold the property within 4 months of completion, that is in the year 2012 itself. So subject to capital gains tax for 2013-14. Now, when the return was filed, the assessee computed the capital gains in two methods. In a sense, first, the capital gain qua the land was considered as a long-term capital gain, and the capital gain with reference to building was considered as short-term gain. However, the assessing officer accepted this position that land long-term capital gain and premises or bungalow on the short-term capital gain. However, the officer rejected the exemption under section 54F. For what reason, we'll see later. Again, the same issue subsequently. Now, when the assessee was in appeal before the CIT appeal, unfortunately, or I cannot comment on that, the CIT appeal has held that since the bungalow was completed in 2012 and sold out in within 4 months, the entire capital gain is a short-term capital gain, and therefore the exemption under 54F does not arise. The matter traveled to the tribunal, and tribunal confirmed that since the land was acquired in 2001, which is not in dispute, the construction started in 2010, and the property got completed in 2012, and thereafter sold within 4 months. So with reference to land, it is a long-term capital asset, and with reference to building, it is a short-term capital asset, and the capital gains need to be bifurcated between two, short-term and long-term. And accordingly, the tribunal accepted this finding of the assessing officer and directed the CIT appeal to consider the exemption. The case is based upon the Bombay High Court decision in Hindustan Hotels Limited, 335 ITR 60 page, and Hila JB Wadia, 216 ITR 376, again Bombay High Court. Now, the same issue was discussed by Pune Tribunal in Chandrasekhar Bagade, ITA number 46, Pune of 2017 issue. That means wherever bungalow is sold, and if the construction of the bungalow is different from the year of purchase, then we have to bifurcate the capital gain with reference to bungalow separately, the construction portion separately, and with reference to land separately. Now, as to the indexation, now this has been the issue before the assessing officers. If A receives the property as a gift from B, B has purchased the property in the year 2010. He has gifted the property to A in the year 2018, and A has sold the property in the year 2020. The assessing officer used to say that based upon the definition, property held by the assessee from 2018, therefore it is a short-term capital asset. But because of 47, the cost goes back to the previous owner. So indexation was denied from the date when it was purchased in 2010, but indexation was granted from the year 2018, from the date from which the asset is held by the assessee. Now, the issue was settled earlier by a special bench decision in Mandula J. Shah's case, and the same has been confirmed by the Bombay High Court in 2013, 355 ITR 474, Bombay High Court. However, there is some sort of controversy with respect to property under construction. In a sense, two issues are there. If a person, an assessee, has booked the flat, say in the year 2015, the said under construction flat was sold in the year 2019, and even in 2019, the flat is under construction, whether it is a long-term or a short-term. Suppose the same flat which is booked in 2015, the completion certificate is obtained in 2018, possession was also taken over by the assessee in 2018, and he sold the flat in 2019, so whether it is short-term or long-term. Now, in that issue, the Bombay High Court says that, again, it has been followed by the Mumbai Tribunal in Zaimal K. Shah's case, Bombay High Court decision in Dr. D.A. Irani, 1998 decision, that in the year 2015, what the assessee acquired was the rights in a property. For instance, you can book a flat even on the 10th floor when the groundwork is going on. That means the flat is in the air, but still you have a right to acquire the property. So that right to acquire a property itself is a property. So what you acquired in 2015 is a right to acquire the property. In 2018, the flat got crystallized into a property, that is a flat, right become a property now. Now that flat you are sold out in 2019. So according to Bombay High Court, this is a short-term capital gain and short-term capital asset and not a long-term capital asset, because what is sold out is a flat and not rights in a flat. A fine distinction that has been made by the Bombay High Court. So if you sell the property before the completion certificate, then in that case, what you have purchased was right in the property, and what you are selling is also rights in a property. The duration between the two is more than 36 months. Then in that case, it will be a long-term capital asset, and accordingly a long-term capital gain depending upon the period of holding. So the real issue is what you are selling, whether you are selling right in a property or the property itself. That is the crucial one. That is based upon the Bombay High Court decision in Dr. D.A. Irani, 1998, 234 ITR 850. Now this has been followed by tribunal in ACIT versus Jaimal K. Shah in 6966 Mumbai 2010 tribunal decision. Now, as to the again the dates for purchase. In the case of an assessee, he paid the initial amount, booking amount, say 1 lakh rupees to the builder, and the builder, say today on 9th of July, and the builder allotted him flat on, say, second floor, flat number 201. The receipt was issued for 1 lakh rupees. And after 3-4 months, say in the month of September, October, after having made certain reasonable amount, the document got registered, say in the month of October 2021. Now the issue is, for a short-term or long-term capital asset period calculation, should we calculate it from, say, 10th of October when the flat was registered in the name of the assessee officially with the registrar, or from the date of 9 July when the flat was allotted by the builder, even though the document is not registered, on acceptance of token amount of rupees 1 lakh. The Bombay High Court in the case of Vembu Vaidyanathan in 2019, 413 ITR 248 page, has held that date of allotment is important. That is the date on which the builder received 1 lakh rupees. At that time, when the 1 lakh rupees is paid, builder issued him a letter confirming that flat number 201 is booked in the name of the assessee. That is the date from which the date of purchase is to be recognized for the purpose of computing the short term or long term, that is period of holding, and not from the date of registration that took place in the month of October. Now against the decision, the department filed a special petition with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court declined the petition. Of course, in both the cases, the Supreme Court simply used the word "no interference is required." SLP is dismissed. That means it is not a speaking order of the Supreme Court, so may not be having a binding effect in reality, but still the law as laid down by the Bombay Court, it is applicable to us. So as to the period of holding, we have seen these two cases. Then special provisions with respect to capital gains. One, all of us are aware, the deadliest one being section 50C as well as section 50CA. That is the stamp duty value and agreement value. All of us are aware that if land and building is sold where the stamp duty value is more than the agreement value, the stamp duty value will prevail for the calculation of capital gains. In a sense, if the stamp duty value is 60 lakhs and the agreement value is 50 lakhs, then in that case, the capital gain will have to be worked out with reference to 60 lakhs and not with reference to 50 lakhs, the actual agreement value. Some leeway is provided, 5% variation is permissible. Now that 10% variation is also permissible under the section 50C or 50CA itself. Now, there are certain cases with reference to 50C and 50CA. Now, what that Pune Tribunal has said in KK Nak Private Limited in 2012 decision, since the assessee has filed a return of income, presuming the agreement value with reference to the capital gain calculation, it implies that he has not accepted the stamp duty valuation. So it is binding on the assessing officer to refer the issue to the district valuation officer for the fair value. Now, what was the issue before the tribunal? In that case, the assessee worked out capital gains with reference to 50 lakhs, which is the actual agreement value. The stamp duty value was 60 lakhs. The assessment was made, and the assessing officer has taken a stand that since the assessee has not sought reference to the valuation officer, then there is no need to make a reference to the valuation, then it is binding on the assessee. The matter traveled to the CIT appeal, who also confirmed the fact that assessee never raised the issue of valuation, and therefore the stamp duty value is binding because section 50C says so accordingly, and the reference to valuation is not required at all. Matter traveled to the tribunal. Pune tribunal has held, since the assessee has filed a return of income and has made the tax calculation, capital gains calculation with respect to 50 lakhs only and not with respect to the stamp duty. Since he has done the calculation with respect to 50 lakhs, he has filed a return, he has paid the taxes, implies that he is not accepting the stamp duty value of 60 lakhs, suffice for the department, or it is binding on the tax authorities, the assessing officer, to refer the issue to the district valuation officer on his own. There is no need from the assessee to get a request for referring the issue to the DVO, or there is no such demand from the assessee for referring the issue to the assessing officer. Merely filing the return of income with respect to agreement value, the AO is bound to refer the issue to the district valuation officer. He cannot shrug the issue simply saying that there was no such a demand from the assessee. That issue is reported in 33 CCH 42 Pune Tribunal. It is with respect to duty of assessing officer. Now, on the same issue with respect to the leasehold rights. Now, the leasehold rights, whether it is subject to applicability of section 50C of the Income Tax Act. Now, for example, we have got various leasehold rights like land in MIDC area, where MIDC is the lessor and the land is given for a 99-year duration to the lessee, that is the taxpayer or the assessee. Now, section 50C refers the words land and building. It doesn't have the additional word or any rights in land or building. That means the section restricts itself only to land or building and doesn't go beyond any rights in the land or building. So based upon that, the Pune Tribunal as well as Bombay Tribunal, and later on confirmed by the Bombay High Court in another case, that section 50C is not applicable to leasehold rights. So if any property is sold situated in MIDC area for a consideration below stamp duty value, then 50C is not applicable. However, this logic might boomerang in another issue. In a sense, I'll come to 54EC exemption for a moment. All of us are aware that under section 54EC, you are allowed to make investment up to rupees 50 lakhs in bonds issued by REC Limited or National Highway Authority of India Limited or such other entities. Now, earlier, even if you sell any property, you can invest in 54EC, or you can have 54EC along with 54 or 54F as the case be, that is combination was possible. If you sell jewelry and invest in 54EC bonds, then the exemption is available. However, from assessment year 17-18, the investment is restricted to sale of land or building. Now, the real issue is if you say at 50C, for the purpose of section 50C, leasehold property is not land or building, for the purpose of 50C, the same logic the department may apply to 54EC, that if a person sells leasehold property and invest in bonds the department may very well say that exemption is not available because what you have sold is a leasehold property and not the land or building. Of course, one should not advise that, but if anybody has taken a decision or if anybody has invested in it, then we may have a case to argue upon it, because 50C is a charging section, whereas 54EC is an exemption section, and there are n number of cases, decisions available that exemption section should be followed liberally and charging section to be followed very strictly. But of course, this is without litigation, it is not possible. Assessing officer at the first instance will say that by your own argument, leasehold property is not land or building for 50C. So same logic can be applied for 54EC and exemption may get denied. Now on this issue, I have got one doubt which has not been tested as yet. If an assessee sells a residential flat situate in a society, cooperative housing society, now what is the fate of 50C as well as 54EC? Because as all of us are aware that a flat in a cooperative housing society, society is the owner of the building and you have a right of occupation for life. It is as nothing but sort of a lease in perpetuity. And that's why there's been a specific provision in section 27 of the Income Tax Act. The flat holder is treated as deemed owner because he is not in reality the actual owner. So based upon that, if one argues the case, because you cannot sell the property without the specific approval or consent of the cooperative housing society. That means the transfer is subject to conditions or subject to NOC to be given by the cooperative housing society. Based upon that, one may argue the case that it being a flat in a cooperative housing society, it is nothing but akin to a leasehold property, not a freehold property. Therefore, provisions of section 50C and 50CA for other shares is not applicable. Whereas the same logic may boomerang on the taxpayer if he has invested under 54EC for sale proceeds are invested, capital gains from sale proceeds of property are invested in a bonds. Then we have to take care that at one end we are arguing that residential flat is not land or building, therefore 50C is not applicable, but simultaneously we are claiming that 54EC is available. Both issues to my mind are open as yet. Now similarly, if the property is sold which is under construction, then whether the provisions of section 50C are applicable or not. The Bombay Tribunal in the case of Sri Lakshmi Estate Private Limited has held that 50C is not applicable for property under construction because section 50C has referred to only land or building, not building under construction. Now this can be useful to the most beneficial for the builder developers who sell the property below the stamp duty value, and section 43CA qua business income can be easily avoided by referring to this decision that what the builder has sold is property under construction and not the flat for which completion is available. So it is not a land or building. Therefore, 43CA is not applicable and whatever is the agreement value will be applicable. The citation is 798 ITA number 798 Mumbai 2018, the decision given in 2019 late year. So this is how you can come out of section 50C, and 50CA is with respect to shares of a private company where the fair valuation is to be adopted. Now the valuation for the purpose of section 50CA is provided in rule 11UA and 11UAA. Now there the valuation is to be done by a chartered accountant, and if the shares are to be issued by a company to the public, for a premium, then the valuation is to be done by the valuer, but who is known as merchant banker, category 1 merchant banker. So with respect to shares of a private company being transferred from one person to another, you have to have a valuation, fair valuation by an approved valuer is not required. The 11 UAA refers to the chartered accountant as the word, whereas the word valuer, approved valuer or registered valuer is used under the Companies Act. The same connotation is not used under the Income Tax Act. Now, the assessee may choose either method, net asset value method or the DCF method, but whatever method is chosen by the assessee is binding on the tax authorities. In a sense, if the assessee has selected the net asset method, then the assessing officer cannot dictate the assessee that you must follow DCF method or vice versa. So if the assessee has followed net asset method and an assessing officer has a doubt in it, or he feels that the valuation is not proper, then he may refer the valuation to approved valuer, but he cannot say that you have done the valuation under net asset value basis and you should have done it on discounted cash flow basis. Now that compulsion cannot be thrust upon by the assessing officer. If you choose for DCF method, then the assessing officer can challenge the DCF method. If you choose net asset method, the assessing officer can challenge that net asset value method, but he cannot dictate the method other than what you have selected. So whatever your choice, because normally the valuation under DCF method is more than the net asset value, not only but generally. So for that purpose, we have to have 50C where the agreement value for transfer shares on either of the basis, whichever is higher, to be adopted for the purpose of computation of capital gains. Now, then there is a special provision with respect to section 50, that is depreciable asset. All of us are aware that in case of depreciable asset, if the property, if an asset is sold and after crediting or after reducing the sale proceeds of a depreciable asset from the block, if still there is a positive block, then you calculate depreciation on the balance amount. Suppose the opening block of building is say 60 lakhs, consisting of three premises or 3 flats or 3 offices, and one office is sold for 50 lakhs, then in that case, 60 lakhs minus 50 lakhs, you have to calculate depreciation on the balance amount of 10 lakhs. That 50 lakhs per se is not taxable, but it gets reduced from the opening WDV or opening block of buildings. However, if the opening block of building is 60 lakhs, and if you sell one office premises for 100 lakhs, in that case, your block will be minus 40 lakhs. And even though there are physically 2 premises available, but the block being minus 40 lakhs, that entire 40 lakhs is deemed as short-term capital gain. I think the example is clear. Now, this 40 lakhs deemed short-term capital gain, it has got 2 issues to be considered. One is, what is the tax rate applicable? According to Pune Tribunal decision in case of Yashwan Engineering Private Limited, 2017, 51 CCH 260 Pune. In fact, I am the person who argued this case. The tribunal confirmed that the tax liability on this 40 lakhs is the tax rate is applicable is that of long-term capital asset and not that of short-term capital asset. Even though it is a short-term capital gain, the tax rate is not 30%, it being a short-term capital gain of a depreciable asset held for more than 36 months. It is a long-term capital asset. Gain is short-term capital gain. The tax rate applicable is 20% and not 30%. There, one can easily save 10% tax in the tax rates. Now, when after this decision, I specifically remember the assessing officer called me over there. You have given a decision, but the system doesn't allow for a short-term capital gain, the tax rate of 20%, and I had to give the appeal effect. I have no answer but to explain that it is your problem, but I can suggest that remove this short-term capital gain from short-term capital mechanism in your system, show the entire 40 lakh rupees in a long term, the tax rate will compute automatically at 20% and the system worked. But practically, there is difficulty at ground level in applying 20% rate. Even this issue arises while filing the tax return. The system does not allow us to choose 20% tax rate in case of depreciable asset, which is treated as a short-term gain. In my opinion, there is no alternative unless the case is selected for scrutiny. Before the assessing officer, you can raise this issue. If not, before the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals, you can certainly raise this issue. Because the assessing officer may not accept this 20% contention because he is governed by the Gates decision that any claim to be made in the return of income and nothing can be made before the assessing officer in the computation or by way of a later. Doesn't matter, he will reject that 20% your claim, the matter will go to the CIT appeal. In that case, you can raise this 20% issue before the CIT appeal, because as per Bombay High Court decision in Prithvi Brokers case, then a claim can be made before the CIT appeal for the first time, even though the assessing officer cannot entertain the claim, the CIT appeal is bound by law to accept the additional claim raised for the first time before him. And if he gives it, well and good. If he doesn't give it, the tribunal will certainly give, where the tax rate is 20% for a depreciable asset on which there is a short-term capital gain. So issue is short-term capital gain, tax rate applicable is that of a long-term capital asset. Similarly, again in the case depreciable asset, it is a short-term capital gain, but if you invest that 40 lakh rupees short-term capital gain under section 54 EC bonds, then exemption under section 54 EC is available. All of us are aware that 54 EC is available for a long-term capital asset and not for short-term capital asset. The Bombay High Court has distinguished this in Edge Builders case, that the gain is short-term capital gain, but the asset is long-term capital asset. It is a deeming provision under section 50 is restricted to that section only. It cannot travel beyond section 50. So under 54 EC, it is a long-term capital asset. So 40 lakhs, if you don't want to pay 20% tax, you can invest it in 54 EC bonds and can avail entire exemption. So depreciable asset, this benefit is available. One need not pay 30% tax or the tax as applicable at the highest rate. Then there are certain issues with respect to exemptions. The exemption is under section 54 or 54F. All of us are aware that the new asset, that is residential premises, must be purchased before the due date of filing return of income under section 139(1) of the Income Tax Act. If the property is not purchased, if the new asset is not purchased before the due date of filing return of income, then you are required to keep money deposited in capital gain account scheme with any scheduled bank. Let us take the example. If the property is sold for say 1 crore and the index cost is say 30 lakhs, resulting into a long-term capital gain of 70 lakhs. Out of that 70 lakhs, the assessee purchased a new property by making a payment of 20 lakhs before the due date of filing return of income. So 50 lakhs were not invested. So is required to keep this money in a capital gain account scheme as per subsection 4 of section 54 as well as under section 54F. And then only you can claim exemption under section 54F4 or 54(4), and later on that money is to be utilized for the purpose of making payment toward the purchase of new asset. In one case, what has happened? The assessee executed a registered purchase deed for the purchase of a new asset before the due date of filing of return of income. The due date, suppose, is 31st July. The agreement for purchase of new property was executed in the month of June. And out of 70 lakhs capital gain, only 20 lakhs were paid. So 50 lakhs were not paid. And that 50 lakhs amount was paid subsequent to the date of filing of return of income, or as per the agreement between the builder and the assessee with reference to the completion in respect of the new property. So the assessing officer denied the exemption under section 54 only on the ground that the money which is not used toward the purchase of new property should have been deposited in capital gain account scheme, and since that has not been deposited by the assessee, the exemption available under section 54 subsection 4 is not available to the taxpayer, and accordingly he made the addition. The CIT appeal confirmed the addition. The matter went to the tribunal. In Pune tribunal, case is late Nandakumar B. Faltane, ITA number 1577 Pune /2015. In that decision, the Pune tribunal has taken a very liberal interpretation, saying that since the property was purchase of new property was registered in the month of June, that is well before the due date of return of income, he has paid 20 lakhs, then it is sufficient for granting exemption under section 54 or 54F as the case may be. Because when he has executed a registered deed in the month of June, then assessee is under legal obligation to make payment for the purchase of new property, and it is sufficient. There is no need to deposit such money in the specific capital gain account scheme. The exemption by the assessing officer cannot be denied simply on the ground that money was not deposited in capital gain account scheme. So this is certainly a beneficial decision, because many times it so happens in practicality, the assessees are not aware of it, or they come for the first time to file the return of income after the due date is over. And when the professional like us informs the assessee that you should have deposited this money in a special bank account, and when the money was not deposited, we feel that the exemption will not be available. But the Pune tribunal says that exemption is still available to the taxpayer. The case is Nandakumar B. Faltane, and based upon that, the decisions are given in favor of the taxpayer in various appellate authorities like CIT appeal also. Then one more ticklish issue is with respect to 54F and section 50C of the Income Tax Act. And 54 read with 50C of the Income Tax Act. Let's see two issues separately. First is 54 and 50C. Now, in this case, the stamp duty value is, say, 1 crore. Agreement value is 90 lakhs, or say 85 lakhs. So the stamp duty value is to be applied for the computation of capital gains. And let us assume that index cost is 35 lakhs. So 1 crore minus 35 lakhs, 65 lakhs is the capital gain. So one should invest 65 lakhs in the new property. But the assessee maintained that I have received only 85 lakhs. So from 85 lakhs, he deducted index cost 35 lakhs, and the capital gain, that is 50 lakhs, he invested in a new property. So he wanted to claim exemption under section 54 of rupees 65 lakhs by investing only 50 lakhs. You get the issue? So by investing 50 lakhs, he wanted to claim exemption of 65 lakhs because how much money he has actually received? 85 lakhs minus index cost 35 lakhs. Capital gain is 50 lakhs, which needs to be invested, although capital gain is worked out with respect to 1 crore, the stamp duty value. The Bombay High Court said that under section 54, you have to invest capital gains and has got nothing to do with the amount that is received by way of agreement. The contention of the SSC was also that capital gain calculation with reference to section 50C is limited to that purpose only, that capital gain worked out as per 50C cannot be used for 54. Bombay High Court said no, capital gain for 50C and the word capital gain for 54 are identical and the same. So by investing 50 lakhs, you cannot get the exemption of section of capital gain of 65 lakhs. This is with reference to 54 and 50C. However, it is something different under 50C and 54F. In case of section 54F, what is required to be invested is the net consideration and not capital gains. So taking the same example, stamp duty value 1 crore, agreement value 85 lakhs, index cost is 35 lakhs. So consideration is 85 lakhs and capital gain is 65 lakhs. So if you invest 85 lakhs, then exemption will be 65 lakhs. That means for the purpose of section 54A, you need not invest the deemed consideration of 100 lakhs. What you have to invest, the actual consideration of 85 lakhs, because the difference in two sections, 54 refers to investment of capital gain, whereas 54F refers to investment of a net consideration. So there might be a situation where the net consideration is much low. For example, if you sell a property worth stamp duty value with 1 crore, agreement value is only 35 lakhs or say 50 lakhs. Now from this 50 lakhs, index cost is 35 lakhs. So 15 lakhs is a capital gain with your calculation, but because of section 50C, the capital gain calculation will be 1 crore minus 35, that is 65 lakhs. But the actual amount received by you is only 50 lakhs. So if you purchase a new property for 50 lakhs, you can claim exemption of 65 lakhs because what section 54F requires you to invest net consideration, whereas under section 54, what you are required to invest is capital gains. So in reality, if 54F is to be applied and if there is a difference between stamp duty value and agreement value, the exemption is to be calculated with reference to the agreement amount received and not with reference to deemed value of consideration under section 50C of the Income Tax Act. Then there are other issues with respect to certain transactions like partnership firm. Now, as to the partnership firm, sorry, one more thing that is important issue that has been left out is in the definition of capital asset. I have to go back. All of us might have experienced this situation where the assessee claimed that I have sold agricultural land situate beyond 8 kilometers from Pune municipal limit, somewhere 30-40 kilometers. It is an agricultural land, therefore not liable to tax, exempt under section 214 because it is not a capital asset at all. But according to the Supreme Court in Sarifa Bibi Muhammad Ibrahim, 1993 204 ITR 631, whether agricultural land is an agricultural land for the purpose of income tax needs to be ascertained in each and every case. Because as all of us are aware, that lands in India are basically agricultural lands. If you want to convert that usage of agricultural land, then you have to make an application, then only it becomes a non-agricultural land. So by default, lands are always agricultural land. You have to convert it into any use by following a certain procedure. So if such land is sold out, many times the simple question to be asked to the taxpayer is it really used for agricultural purposes? In 99.99% of the cases, we get the answer no. He only insists that on 7/12 extract, it is a parzamin, it's a barren land, or a grass is grown on that, and therefore it is exempt from tax because it is agricultural land. The Supreme Court says this is not sufficient. For the purpose of income tax, we have to ensure that the land was really used for agricultural purposes. Merely it is an agricultural land doesn't become agricultural land for the purpose of income tax. So that factor and that particular decision about dozen conditions or dozen criteria have been given by the Supreme Court to ascertain, and the Supreme Court has said in the end, on the totality of it, we have to consider whether it is agricultural land eligible for exemption under section 214 or not. So it is more of a question of fact rather than of the law. So agricultural land per se is not exempt from capital gains tax. We'll have to ascertain, or if you ask a simple question to our assessee, have you shown any agricultural income in your return of income? In 99.99% of the cases, the assessee never informed the consultant, and the assessee never shows any agricultural income with the presumption that it is exempt from tax, but it has to be taken into account for the rate purposes. Now, in that case, for the purpose of rate, idle income must be disclosed. Then our case becomes more strong to say that the assessee is showing agricultural income, the land was really used for agricultural purposes, then the exemption will be available, of course, depending upon other issues. Now, coming back to the partnership. Now, partnership capital gain is very much complex issue. In a sense, it depends on facts and circumstances of each case. The law is not, I may say, developed in a sense. There are many issues, contrary decisions. In A.M. Naik, Bombay High Court says a retiring partner is subject to capital gains tax. The same Bombay High Court in Prashant Joshi's case said it is not liable to tax. That means in the facts and circumstances of the case, one will have to consider whether retirement of a partner will entail any capital gains tax liability on the part of a partnership firm or on the part of a retiring partner. Then one more special provision is with respect to 45(5)(a), where a person, an assessee has transferred the property to a builder developer, and he is getting the consideration, some amount in cash, some amount as a certain percentage area, or some amount based upon the sales collection by the contractor or builder developer. For example, a plot is of 10,000 square feet is sold by an assessee to a builder developer, and for which he is in receipt of 1 crore as a cash consideration and 45% of the sale proceeds of the flats constructed on that area. Now, in that case, 1 crore is a certainty, so it is to be taxed in the year in which the amount is received, whereas 45% cannot be ascertained in the year of sale, for the simple reason at what price the flats will be sold in future after 2-3 years when the construction is complete, and what is the amount that itself be unascertainable. The capital gains gets postponed till the completion of the property. Please remember, the Act has used the word completion of property and not with reference to the sale of property. So there is other special provisions applicable to capital gains of a property where consideration is received in kind as well as in cash. Now, one more aspect with respect to 46A of the Income Tax Act, that is with respect to buyback of shares. All of us are aware that buyback of shares covered by section 46A, the company is liable to pay the capital gains tax and the taxpayer assessee is exempt from tax under section 10. Now the issue is under 46A, it is treated as transfer of shares of a private company. Now the issue is if the fair value as per section 50CA of share is 100 rupees and the company buys back its shares for rupees 20. Now the question is whether the difference amount of 80 rupees is deemed consideration taxable in the hands of company because they have to pay capital gains tax under 46A to the tax authorities. There is a good decision by the Bombay Tribunal where the Bombay Tribunal analyzed with respect to 56(2)(10) of the Income Tax Act. Because what was argued before the tribunal was, since the fair value of a share is 100, it is being purchased by the company for rupees 20. The difference 80 rupees is income chargeable to tax in the hands of company under section 56(2)(10) as a gift, and therefore it is income liable to be taxed in the hands of the company as income from other sources. So company will pay 20 rupees on 20 rupees, the tax applicable at a rate plus on 80 rupees, whether they are required to pay as income under section 56(2)(10) under the head income from other sources. Bombay Tribunal has held that 56(2)(10) is not applicable because 56(2)(10) refers to property purchased by an assessee for a consideration below its fair value is deemed as income taxable in the hands of the person who is receiving the property. Now the issue is whether the shares bought back by the company, whether it is a property. If it is a property, then 56(2)(10) is applicable. If it is not a property, then 56(2)(10) is not applicable. Then the tribunal referred to the provisions under the Companies Act, wherein a company is allowed to buy back 25% of its existing capital, and the shares so bought back by the company must be cancelled within 7 days. That means company do not purchase the property, those bought back shares are not available for reissue again. If they buy back the shares on 9th of July, then before 16th of July, the shares must be cancelled. The tribunal confirmed that since the assessee company is not buying any property, 56(2)(10) is not applicable, and as such, the question of taxing it, the difference between the fair value under 50CA and the buyback value of rupees 20, the difference 80 rupees is not income liable to tax. Now, where this is a good way for tax planning. Now, where this can be used, a private company owned by 2 families or 2 friends, and one want to exit it. And he asked the other director to purchase his own shares. The fair value is 100 and the cost price is 10, assuming that indexation, the cost comes to 30. then on 70 rupees, the person selling the shares, he is liable to tax the difference amount of 70 rupees. And the persons have agreed that instead of selling the shares at 100 rupees, the company will buy back shares at rupees 10 or at rupees 20. The issue was whether the fair value and the buyback value, the difference, will it be treated as gift, taxable in the hands of the company under the income from other sources? Bombay Tribunal said it is not applicable because on a buyback, company in reality is not buying any property at all, whereas 56(2) applies to when assessee purchases a property. Now, this is one of the way where we have used this tax planning and it has worked. Now, as to the DVO, as all of us are aware, that when the issue is referred to DVO, the DVO gives the report, and the report given by the DVO, the assessee can challenge it. But normally DVO gives the report only after considering your views. But the report of DVO is binding on tax authorities. DVO's report cannot be rejected by tax authorities because DVO is also a government employee and therefore an expert in his field. Normally they are the engineers from CPWD. So their valuation is binding on income tax authorities. The income tax authorities cannot challenge it that the DVO has done the wrong valuation or has not considered certain issues properly. They cannot say so. Now the issue has become not redundant in a sense where the assessing officer has challenged the fair value on 1/4/2001. In that case, 1/4/1984, where you have considered the fair market value of 1/4/2001 as say 5 lakh rupees, and based upon that, you have done the indexation. The assessing officer was of the opinion that 5 lakh itself is a very high value. Therefore, he has referred the issue to DVO or has estimated the value to be at rupees 4 lakhs. And accordingly, he applied the indexation. The Bombay High Court in Puja Print case has said that 50C allows only when or the valuation reference to valuation officer is possible only when the assessing officer feels that the value is more than what is disclosed by the taxpayer by the assessee. Now, in this case, the assessee has disclosed the value of 5 lakhs. If the assessing officer feels that its value is more than 5 lakhs, then only he can refer the issue to the valuation officer. The assessee himself has shown the value at 4 lakh rupees below what is there. In that case, such reference to valuation officer is not proper. Accordingly, the Bombay Court has held it in Puja Print case. However, to overcome this lacuna, the law is amended. Now the law permits if the assessing officer feels that the fair market value on 1/4/2001 should be less than what is disclosed by the assessee, even in that case, he can refer the issue to the valuation officer. But the amendment has taken place, I think to my knowledge, from 1st April 2015. So if any issues are there pertaining to earlier assessment year, one can make use of the valuation officer of 55A on this issue. Now, coming back to the capital gains. Now, let me conclude it because I have considered only the issues with respect to capital gains. I have not considered clause by clause or section by section the provisions of the Income Tax Act because I presume that we are aware of the basic concepts of capital gains. I request the managing committee to take over the charge for if there are any queries I will try my best to answer them.
Yeah, if anyone have any questions, they can please ask freely about it. I think we have to unmute everyone, then only they can ask questions.
Hello, there are some issues in chat that has been referred.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go one by one. What shall be the status of asset in terms of long term or short term if booking amount paid in small packets for 5 years and purchase deed executed 1 year before the date of sale? Now I have referred to one decision of the Bombay High Court, that is with Vembu Vaidyanathan. The citation is 413 ITR 248 Bombay High Court. It's a 2019 decision where the Bombay High Court has stressed the importance of allotment. That is, when you book the flat in the first year, and if you have been given a specific flat, say flat number 201, then even if you execute the deed subsequent thereto, according to Bombay High Court, the period is to be computed with reference to the date of allotment, because by issuing a letter of allotment to you, the builder developer cannot sell that flat to any other person. That means the flat is specifically earmarked to you. So if you get on the first booking amount a specific flat number, and with an undertaking that it cannot be sold out to any other person, the date will start, the period of 36 months or 24 months as the case may be, will count from the date of booking the flat and not from the date of execution of a purchase deed. Vembu Vaidyanathan, Bombay High Court decision. (45)(5)(a), whole of capital gain is that is on cash consideration as well as constructed area given as consideration is taxable only after completion. I guess sir said cash quantum is taxable on receipt. Yes, I said it. Could you please share all the citations that you have mentioned? I'll be giving my as a 2-page summary sort of it to the branch, and from the branch you can, I think the branch will take care of sending that 2-page summary to all of the participants. I'll do that. A tenant has been allotted a flat in redevelopment with 0 value. What will be the cost of purchase for the calculation of capital gain at the time of sale? See, when a tenant has been allotted a flat in redevelopment with 0 value, whether it is really a 0 value, because the developer must have entered into an agreement with the tenant for the allotment of the flat. And in that case, the agreement value will be 0, consideration will be 0, but the stamp duty value will be, say, 25 lakhs or 30 lakhs. Then on allotment of flat by the developer against tenancy right, it is liable to tax as long-term capital gains provided he has stayed in that tenancy for more than 3 years. Because under section 55, the cost of acquisition as given by the Income Tax Act is nil. So whatever the value which is disclosed in the document registering the allotment of flat to the tenant, it will be subject to capital gains tax at the first instance. Then when that flat is subsequently sold out, the cost for, in my opinion, will be zero only, because actual cost have not been incurred by the tenant in acquiring that flat. See, for cost of acquisition is nil for the purpose of tenancy rights. Therefore, that value is taxable as capital gain when the flat is allotted. So it is a cost of acquisition, whereas when the said flat is sold out subsequently, the actual cost is zero. So again, you have to pay the tax at that time. That is my personal opinion. Of course, facts, if there are difference, we may consider it. In a sense, if registering the document for tenancy when the flat is allotted, the taxpayer might have paid stamp duty and registration charges. That is certainly a cost of acquisition for the flat which he intends to sell subsequently. Qua that stamp duty and registration charges, he can seek the indexation. What will be the taxation effect for transfer of land held by proprietor to LLP once he becomes a partner? Now the law is very much settled over here on account of Sunil Siddharth Bhai, that it is a transfer from proprietor to the partnership firm, and the amount credited to partner's capital account is a consideration. Agreement executed before March, possession handed over on the execution of the agreement, but payment received in June next year, and agreement registered in June after receipt of payment. Year of taxability of capital gain, whether in March in the year of execution of agreement or next year when it is registered. See, important is when the possession is given, agreement executed before March and possession handed over on the execution of the agreement. See, capital gain arises on the transfer of a capital asset. Nowhere it refers to receipt of consideration. So even if consideration is not received at all, still it is subject to capital gains. Whether valuation done by a registered valuer to be considered while computing capital gain which is less than the stamp duty value. See, for section 50C, it refers to the agreement value and the stamp duty value. The question of registered valuer is immaterial. Lakshmi Estate, I will give the reference. One has asked for it. Shri Lakshmi Estate Private Limited. I repeat, Shri SHREE Lakshmi Estate Private Limited. ITA number 798/MUM for Mumbai /2018. It's a, I can say it's an unreported decision, but if you Google it, you can have this Shri Lakshmi Estate Private Limited, and accordingly you find a reference where the tribunal has held that it is a property under construction, and 43CA refers to land or buildings. It doesn't refer to under construction. Therefore, 43CA is not applicable. It is certainly a beneficial decision from the builder developer's point of view. If amount towards purchase of flat is paid in installment to the builder, how is the index cost calculated at the time of such sale? See, when you have executed a registered document, from that date or date when you have purchased the property or when the flat is allotted to you, from that date, the period of computing starts. That is long-term, short-term, and for indexation purposes. Actual payment, where even if it is in installments, it doesn't matter. So you have to calculate for the entire amount of flat from the date of receipt of possession and not for over a period of 2-3 years, whatever you have paid it. When old house goes for redevelopment, there is a D&PA made with the builder for larger area of flat. Without additional amount paid to the builder, will there be a capital gain for development? In my opinion, the answer is no, because in reality, if you consider the real income theory, nothing has been received by the assessee excepting the old flat. Land is purchased having a RCC structure which is inhabitual against sale of another land. Land is purchased having RCC structure which is inhabitual against sale of land, and house is constructed on the sale land within 3 years. Frankly speaking, I could not get the specific issue. Now, the question, I think, as I understand, for 54F, 3 years are over, the land is not, the construction of a new property is not complete. Then what is the status of exemption? There are at least half a dozen cases by the various high courts and the tribunals. Even the Karnataka High Court in about 2 years back that has decided that the property is not completed is not the reason for the taxpayer to deny exemption under Section 54. So even if beyond 3 years property is not complete for the reasons beyond the control of the assessee, exemption cannot be denied. See, he has raised issue for under construction flat booking amount and installments are paid over 3-4 years, whether for index cost shall be computed from the date of booking for full cost, even payments are made in 3-4 years, or index cost shall be computed as per the year of payment. So indexation with respect to payment does not arise because it is with reference to cost of improvement to the property and doesn't deal with the payment as such. So if the agreement is registered or it is allotted to you, now then subsequently payment is made in 2-3 years down the line, still in my opinion, you can compute the indexation from the date on which the flat is allotted or when the document is registered, as the case may be. If it is taxable, then when will be taxed? Now, which one? Rishikesh. Now, what is this question earlier? See, if it is taxable, then what will be taxed? When will be taxed? Now, in case of a tenant getting the flat for 0 cost, one can use of 54F. See, the tenancy cost is 0 as per Section 55 of the Income Tax Act. The agreement which is registered is say for 50 lakhs, then he is liable to capital gains tax for 50 lakhs. 50 lakhs minus 0 cost, and the amount is long-term capital gain if the tenancy is for more than 3 years. Now that long-term capital gain of 50 lakhs is invested in a new residential property. So under Section 54F, he can claim the exemption. See, as I told you, in case of MIDC land, 50C is not applicable. The case I have cited is Yashwan Engineering Private Limited, Pune Tribunal case. Now, MIDC factory in MIDC area, Now, the same case, Yashwan Engineering Private Limited is with respect to factory building, in fact, because all earlier decisions, Atulji Puranik, Cancast, all these cases with reference to the MIDC land, and Yashwan Engineering case is with respect to the construction of the factory building on MIDC land is held to be leasehold property. Therefore, 50C is not applicable. So MIDC land as well as construction thereon for both 50C is not applicable. Whether the amount can a land introduced in a partnership firm by a partner as a capital without having any agreement regarded as transfer, whether value credit to capital account to be considered or the stamp duty value to be considered. See, the agreement value will have to be considered because the stamp duty values will come into picture only when you register the document. Otherwise, the stamp duty is not concerned at all. I think that is the last one I have answered. Is there still any queries?
There are a few questions in the chat option as well.
Yeah, I'm referring to chat only.
There are in Q&A, we have few questions in Q&A and few in chat box.
Because I got the last one from Mukesh, etc. Can a land introduced in a partnership firm? That is the last one I am having it.
Okay, so if someone can unmute themselves and they can ask questions directly if they have any questions. I request Pune branch to unmute all so that they can ask some questions. We got one question from Vikas Jain.
Yeah. For 26 QB, in case the property sold on March and paid with 25 lakhs and registered also in March, the balance amount was paid in April and also deducted TDS as and when the amount was paid to the seller. The question is how to file that return, and can we bifurcate the TDS in separate years? If yes, how to show it in the income tax return? (26 QB in March, paid 25 lakhs, registered also in March, balance amount was paid in April, and also deducted TDS as and when the amount was paid to the seller. Okay. The question is how to file the return, and can we bifurcate that TDS in separate years? If yes, how to show in the income tax return? As I understand from your query, that in 1 year you have executed a deed selling a property more than 50 lakhs. The buyer had deducted tax at source on the first installment of 25 lakhs, say pertaining to assessment year 21-22, and he again made a payment of another 25 lakhs in the month of June when he paid the balance amount, and he had deducted tax at source for AY 22-23. Is it the question? I think so. Now, since the document was executed on March 21, it is liable to tax for AY 21-22. You can ask the tax buyer of the property to make the payment for the tax for AY 21-22 only, so that you can have the credit of it in its entirety. I think that is possible.
Do we have more questions?
Rajesh, I will send a 2-page note to you, to the branch, containing all the case laws and citations. Kindly forward it to the viewers.
Sure. Pune branch will do it. Yeah. I think we covered all the questions, right?
There's a question and answers also. This one is considered.
Yes.
I have taken it from chat only.
Okay.
I'll try my best to answer them.
Anonymous.
Also, brief about the property sold by NRI to RI. So how much TDS needs to be deducted at source? Now, in this case, the resident individual has to obtain a TAN number, deduct tax at source at the applicable rates given in the Finance Act. Section 195 is applicable, and the tax rate is not given under Section 195. It is given in the Finance Act. The current rate is 20% plus surcharge plus cess, unless the buyer or the seller applies to the income tax office, again, I think by filing Form 13 online for reduced rate of tax. In that case, that reduced rate of tax can be deducted. Otherwise, if it is 23%, then it is 23.92%, depends upon the amount involved, because the surcharge varies beyond certain limits. Can we claim 54 exemption on the basis of agreement to sell with 10% advance with the builder, where possession and sale deed will be made after 4 years? So again, this is a question of fact, in a sense that JB Wadia's case, that is of the Bombay High Court, the citation is, just we find out, you can note down that Hilla JB Wadia, HILLA, Hilla JB Wadia, 1995, 216 ITR 376, Bombay High Court decision. Now, in that case, the Bombay High Court has stressed the importance of domain over the property or control over the property. So by paying just 10% and nothing is being done by the builder or nothing has been done by you, in reality, whether you have acquired a domain or whether it is a, what can I say, misuse or abuse of the provisions, then in that case, the assessing officer will tax it. And if you can't prove that you have domain over the property by making substantial payments, then unless you prove that, the decision may not be in your favor. Merely registration will make you liable to pay a responsibility on your part, burden on your part. But if you do not discharge it within reasonable time, the adverse inference can be drawn by the assessing officer.
So are we done with all the questions and answers? Or still anyone wants to ask more questions? I think if not, then we can proceed with our formal vote of thanks. So
or I may suggest, if anybody wants a specific answer to their specific issues, they can write to the branch.
Yes.
And along with their email IDs.
Yeah.
I don't mind giving them detailed reply or the case laws also, which is required by them. I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you. Okay. So I see Rajeshri sir once again extend special thanks to you, sir, for sparing some time and explaining us about many things which we have actually not practicing from long, because I personally am not into practice. I'm working with Swiss Bank, so what we see छूट जाता है काफी सारी चीजें पीछे से. Now a lot of things have been revised, and I'm really glad to be part of this session. And thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And as sir told, if someone has any questions or wants more explanation for their question, they can write to Pune branch. They'll surely.
You can share my email ID also. There's no problem in that.
Okay. Yeah. And so like it's a 5-day refresher course. So stay tuned to even tomorrow we have another session at the same time. So till that time, take care. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.